Julia's Bookstore, written by Sarah Micah. Chapter 5. Now, back to the bookstore, the narc. Julia had a nightmare worse than Elm Street, of military soldiers fighting, and then with their guns up in the air. Next, Julia had saw a symbol which favored one of witchcraft. Julia then found herself in her brand new bookstore. Julia then looked to the right at the neighborhood's young ones, whom had pale skin with bags underneath their eyes. Now, back to the bookstore, the narc. Julia had opened up her bookstore that morning after she awoke from her nightmare, which was worse than Elm Street. "You are not God," Julia said. "They do not know my thoughts," as she awoke. She then remembered everything would go wrong, from her 3-grand gray guest outfit, to the rain falling down, to the strange figure of the woman, down to the mysterious strange worker. Yesterday was the car crash on day 2. Now it's day 3. Julia opened up her new shop to see her worker standing there already. Julia had wondered why the worker had gotten inside. Julia chose not to question her about it. Julia chose to wear a 1960s number instead, which she wasn't sure if she can do or not, for it hasn't been done for at least 2 decades now. Which would be a 1960s dress, which was tucked like a coat along with different colors in it. Along with her sunflower sandals. Julia had looked appalled at her, yet said nothing. Patience had wore her all jet black as usual, with her short jet black hair. With pale skin and bags underneath her eyes. Julia had noticed this again. She began to feel chills. The very first customer then entered that morning. He had tan skin when he walked in. Julia had demanded that Patience assist the first customer. However, "Good morning," Julia said instead. "And what may I assist you with?" The man had looked important to Julia. Julia had thought that the man may have been a mystery shopper. However, he wasn't one. Julia had told Patience to assist him with the best-selling authors of the 1800s. Arthur Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, and William Hawthorne. Patience then led the man down the aisles of the best-selling authors as her mind became silent again. The customer was well pleased with the service sheet which he had received that morning. As Julia then walked side by side, as the two then walked side by side towards Julia, Julia then sat down at her PC in order to close out her first customer. Julia, too, had been impressed by the way Patience had operated that morning. However, she was still a tad bit skeptical about the stranger she had hired. Yet chose to give her a sound mind. Julia then cashed out her first customer of the day as he left out holding his best-selling author book by Edgar Allan Poe. He too looked back at Julia with pale skin and bags underneath his eyes. Was Julia now imagining this? Well, that went well, didn't it? Said Patience. Edgar Allan Poe. Julia was not one to judge someone harshly. However, Julia had found it odd that Patience would bring up the book again. The sale was already over. Patience continued on. "So, am I hired or fired? Or am I just a lazy retired person she coughed, who'd rather be at home collecting Social Security. Julia's mouth had dropped. Julia had figured that maybe she shall change the subject, then asked Patience to go down the best-selling author's aisle. Patience Wilkinson agreed. As she slowly went to fix the best-selling author aisle, she then began to sing out loudly, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. That's it, said Julia. Leave, and I mean now. Patience looked at Julia with her head tilted to the side, then mysteriously replied to her, Social Security doesn't close until 12 p.m. Where am I going? Julia was fed up. Look, Julia had demanded, just clean the glass. I'm closing out early today. Patience then looked at Julia once again as she blurted out vaguely, I still don't see what you hired me for, she said, for there's no one here right now. And you could have done this shit yourself. Are you serious? Said Julia. However, 8 customers then entered the shop, which proved Patience completely wrong. Patience then stormed out as the 8 customers walked in. Julia then stepped outside and demanded that Patience come back inside. I'm not going back in there, said Patience, not until it clears up. Julia had no time at all. Look, there are plenty of customers, Julia said, as she began to think about her childhood dream again. Please, she said, come back to work. Patience then leaned her head back as she dropped her mouth wide open at Julia, as she gave her an odd look again, as odd as Odd Thomas, a book Julia had read by author Dean Koontz, whom was her favorite author as a teen. Patience continued to stare at her with her mouth wide open as she replied to her, So what? Are you serious? Julia yelled again. Julia then stormed back into her own shop as she sat down at her PC that afternoon. Julia knew that she would have to go back and forth with assisting customers as well as cashing them out all by herself. Patience then stood in outside of the window while staring down at Julia and the customers. Julia then looked up at Patience. Julia began to wonder what Patience had meant by the wrong person. Maybe Patience had meant the wrong person was Julia for her lifelong dream. Julia's bookstore